This is the Rich Dad Radio Show. The good news and bad news about money. Here's Robert Kiyosaki.
Hello, Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show, the good news, and if there's any bad news, there's a lot of it. But anyway, I have a fantastic program. One of my very, very favorite persons. I remember years and years and years ago reading a little green book of his, and it opened my eyes. I went, oh my God, he's thinking exactly, definition of intelligence. If you think like me, you're intelligent. And I said, that was the first time I came across Congressman Ron Paul. And ever since then, I've been following him. And we're very excited because there's so much of what he's been saying has come true. Any comments, Kim?
Yeah, I'm so looking forward to this interview. And thank you, Dr. Ron Paul, for being here. You are I love this word, a self-described constitutionalist. I'm going to adopt that because people say, are you Republican or Democrat? I'm like, I'm pro-Constitution. I'm pro-free markets. I'm pro-liberty and freedoms. So I am still looking forward to hearing you today and what you see, what we can do, and we will take your lead. So
very good.
Here.
So take off there, Dr. Paul.
What's happening and what do you see and what in the world is going on in this crazy world right now?
Everything you've been saying is coming true.
All coming true.
Well, I don't know whether you can say that or not, but I hope not. I don't want that to be true because I worry about what we're leading to. But then again, I try to point out, the bad things that are happening, and I try to get a philosophic point that goes wrong, and then it causes the bad problems. But it's something that I've worked on for a long time. I think it's very, very important, and I just think that things are going badly. But in spite of the fact that things are very bad, and we do our program every day, and we talk about all the problems, but almost every day we try to find something that is beneficial. So I was always amazed when I was doing the presidential campaigns. Of course, people ask me, what did you like most about the presidential campaign and that you did? And it was going to the university and talking to thousands of kids who really were willing to keep their minds open and would listen to me. And not a few, but several times people would come up to me afterwards and they would be excited about it. And they say, what I like about you, Congressman Paul, you're such an optimist. And then I got to thinking, well, if I talk for an hour, 45 minutes at least, we'll be telling them, you're young people, you're inheriting a mess. The monetary system's gone to the dogs. We're going to have perpetual wars. We don't follow the Constitution. Your civil liberties are challenged. And I thought, well, why are they calling me an optimist? And I finally figured it out. First, they want to hear the truth. And I've decided that if they hear it, instead of just hearing lies, everything is fine, and then they don't believe it, the whole thing goes to pot. So what I did by telling them that, and then I did make a precise, a deliberate purpose to try to tell them what solves the problems. People say, well, what are you going to do now? I said, well, we could, it is a big problem, but we could first start off by obeying the Constitution. That's not too complicated, so I would go into the benefits of a free society. And of course, that's why my program is called Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity. And I truly believe it. And that was one thing that people were convinced of, because one individual came up to me after a debate, and I was talking about the Constitution. We ought to just follow it. We shouldn't go to war without a declaration. And the young man came up and he said, what, and he was complimenting me on this. I said, yeah, but so-and-so, right after I talked, he talked about, the Constitution, why we should obey the Constitution. I said, why are you telling me that? What about so-and-so? He said the same thing, didn't he? He said, yeah, he might have said it, but we didn't believe a word he was saying. So I think people are looking for an honest answer, and we are dedicated on the Ron Paul Liberty Report to do precisely that, fully realizing that we don't know all the answers, but also saying, well, that's why you want freedom. You want freedom of choice. You want voluntarism. This whole thing on COVID, just think of people who know so much, the scientists. Boy, they're the ones who are really the enemy, the ones who have declared that they are the scientists, and you have to listen to the scientists. And of course, if they're doing it for political propaganda and monetary gain, then they become very evil. So it's something that I think is very important. I remember the first time I ran for Congress, way back. It was a consequence of the Bretton Woods breaking down on August 15th of 1971. I had been into reading this Austrian economics in the 60s, and it was predicted by the Austrians, the Bretton Woods can't last. Matter of fact, Henry Hazlitt said from 1944 on, it can't last. And of course, there was this collapse in 71. And so it was something that was very important to me and had a large impact on my speaking out.
So let me ask you really specifically here, because the book was called End the Fed. And I think most people do not know this, but Marx was the person who said, if you want to destroy capitalism, you need a central bank. And the Fed is the third central bank America's had. And you also said this, is that the way we finance our wars is through a central bank. And as we just have Afghanistan, and you and I are old enough to remember 1975, when they had the CIA helicopters on top of the roof of the embassy in Saigon, and then now we have Bagram Air Force Base shut down, and $860 billion of weapons are now transferred to the enemies of Israel. And I'm sitting there going, how can they do this? How can they do this? And so that's what, if we could get into the Fed, why did you want to end the Fed? Because, of course, it's not federal, it's not a bank, and it's not U.S. So why did you want to end the Fed?
It has no reserves.
No reserves.
Well, the main thing and the big picture is I believe that big government wouldn't thrive if it didn't have the Fed, because it's a taxing authority. And it's also an authority to control people and grow government. And I've decided that the time I spent in Washington, I came to realize, well, we don't have a big problem. We only have two groups that are giving us trouble: conservatives and liberals. And they each have a reason for spending money, because and I argue the case, and every day I think it comes about this way, is that the big issues, it's very bipartisan. People say, what do you mean? The Republicans hate Nancy Pelosi. Yes, personalities and power struggles, there's a lot of antagonism. But if it's support for the Fed, if it's support for deficits, of spending, if it's support for the war, it's always bipartisan. It wouldn't have happened otherwise. So it wouldn't happen without the Fed. The Fed is the instigator. It's the taxing authority. Of course, it creates all the financial problems, the business cycle, and everything is related to the Fed. So we lived for a good while just with attempts at those first and second attempts at the bank. But basically, we relied with some respect with gold, up until the 20th century. But it's something that we have accepted. But it's the powers, the military-industrial complex. It's the people who want the welfare state. Everybody has to have a safety net. Before I went to Congress, I was convinced, those people who won't work, they get on food stamps and they want housing allowances, all that. And they do, and there's a bunch, and it's big. But I changed my mind on where the real culprits are. And it is in the corporate state. It's this crony capitalism that they have. And this pretense, they're the ones who get all the big money. Who gets bailed out? The little guy really doesn't get bailed out. A lot of times they lose their house and their jobs when there's a downturn. But the others, they don't ever stop and think, why does that happen? So the welfare state is incestuous. It's in there, and that's the person we have to attack.
I want to ask your opinion, because you're the one who said that the Fed can finance these wars. And so what we had, like I said, you and I are old enough to remember 1975, the CIA helicopter on top of the, because I was a Marine pilot in Vietnam. That was a very painful issue to me. Okay, so when you saw this thing happen in Afghanistan, they give a whole base of background, and they give $860 billion worth of equipment to Russia and China for technological gains, and they arm the enemies of Israel. What did you think? That's what I want to know.
I think what most people think, this is atrocious, how dumb can they be, and this sort of thing. But I don't think it's stupidity. I think it's a reflection of a philosophy of interventionism, and that's the way we run our economy and our foreign policy, and it's acceptable. But in this day and age, in these last 10 years especially, I place a lot of blame on the acceptance of the cultural Marxism, because I think it's real. I think there's a collusion of all the people, the deep state, the banks and the corporations. Why else does it make any sense that big corporations, if they were honest, why would they collude with government and follow their orders? So the government wants to invade our privacy. Well, oh, no, we don't. We respect the people's privacy. So we'll get Facebook and Google. They'll do it for us, and we'll know how to squeeze them because, they are funded. They were funded from the beginning, and they have regulations to deal with. So they're very much involved. So that is, the real problem that we have is that the government and big corporations are one and the same. So I thought when that was happening in Vietnam as well as Afghanistan, that yes, it's a failure in overall philosophy and policy. Policy would be a big deal, but policies are designed and controlled by morality as well. And I think the willingness to go along with cultural Marxism and go with wokeism, that's a different thing, and I think that's our real threat right now because of the cooperation of the financial institutions with the government. Because if you have crony capitalism and corporatism, it has been well predicted by Mises that the next step is fascism. And I think we're getting closer to that. I don't think we're going to have old-fashioned communism or exaggerated socialism and ownership of property. I think it's going to be the exaggeration of a fascist state, and I think we're moving in that direction.
So if I ask Dr. Paul, if I may ask a question. So the whole COVID thing that's happened, they've given people so much money. You talk about a welfare state. They're giving everybody money not to work. Businesses are having trouble finding workers, and small businesses are getting shut down right, left, and center. Is this all part, in your opinion, of this culture, this Marxist culture that we're heading towards? What do you see?
Well, I think it's bad economic philosophy. I think the professors at the universities, have contributed significantly to this because all the people that work for the Fed, and there's hundreds and hundreds, and they work in the university, and they're paid to do papers to endorse the central bank. So I think that's very important. But then it's also an addiction. Because right now we certainly passed a point where if you change the Congress and got a lot more supportive of our viewpoint, they're not going to change it. They have a total addiction to this, and every once in a while there will be a hint. Like when the overnight rates jump up to 9 or 10%. This is not a good system, and it's a good idea. We need more price inflation. And you try to, right now they're talking about cutting back on the purchase of treasury bills. And that might happen for a day or two. They tried to shrink the balance sheet a year or so ago, and it caused a calamity in the market. So it's not going to happen. We're going to advance. The people are going to support, because one thing that's characteristic of conditions like this, no matter which country you're in, when the prices go up, the people go to the government and say, you have to help us. We don't have enough money. The costs are going up. So the government gives them more money, not realizing that was the basic problem they have. And then they end up with Venezuela. Nobody knows exactly when this is going to finally stop and reverse itself. But I'll tell you what, I think this bubble is the biggest one ever in our history of the world. And it's not going to be Venezuela or Zimbabwe. I think because the dollar has been so used around the world, even though a little bit less now than it used to be, it has to be liquidated. I believe when we get to this point where debt is subsidized by a Federal Reserve and they just print the money to the tune of trillions and trillions of dollars, that the change has to be liquidation. The reason that the Depression lasted so long is they wouldn't allow any changes. They wouldn't allow wages to go down and debt be liquidated. In 1921, they allowed that, and the Depression lasted a short period of time. But now it is too big now, because that's why the Marxists have lined up. This has never been this way before. When I first went to Congress, nobody ever came up to me and said, I'm a socialist on this idea. I can't agree with you. But over the years while I was there, they would come up and they would say to Ron, you know what? Because they thought it was respectful to be libertarian on some issues. They would come up and say, whisper to me, they say, Ron, I want to vote with you on this because I'm a libertarian on this issue. Well, now the talk among the halls is you find out they are either announcing it themselves or they're whispering, hey, I'm really with you. I'm a Marxist. And that's a reflection of what's going on here in our university system.
Thank you for saying all that, because that's what I'm saying in my books. But anyway, the next thing is you're a constitutionalist. Now, I want to go into this because this is my opinion, and it's only my opinion. In August of 2021, which was last month, this is September 2021, right after 9/11. They let 340,000 undocumented aliens across the border. And I don't know how many are coming in from Afghanistan now. Now, is it possible, just in your opinion, as you're well-versed in this, and is it possible what they intend to do is get all of these people to vote? Then they're going to stack the Supreme Court, and then they will change the Constitution. So when we come back, that's a question I have to ask for you. I'm going to talk to you because you're a constitutionalist, and I agree 100% with that. We're a nation of laws, and we obey the Constitution. That's what makes America so different. We have a Constitution, and you're a constitutionalist. Is it possible the ultimate goal is to stack the Supreme Court with all of these voters who need money from the liberals, and then once they stack the Supreme Court, they'll change the Constitution? So when we come back, I know you have an answer for that one. We got to be careful because we might be censored by the powers to be at Silicon Valley. But when we come back, really, that's kind of the reason I wanted to get to talk to you about that. And after they give Bagram Air Force Base to the enemies of our only ally out in the area, Israel, you go, something's going on here that we don't know about. So when we come back, we'll be talking to Ron Paul. Welcome back, Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show, the good news and bad news about money. You can listen to the Rich Dad Radio program anytime, anywhere on iTunes, Android, and YouTube. And we also archive all of our programs at richdadradio.com. We archive them because we don't advise anybody. We don't tell people what to buy this or buy that or do this. We're purely educational, and we archive that because one of the ways we learn more is via repetition. You can't learn to speak English unless you repeat speaking it a number of times. You got to make some mistakes, or golf or anything else you have to repeat. So all of our programs are archived at richdadradio.com. Again, we don't recommend stocks, bonds, mutual funds, anything like that. We just want to have people understand what we're saying. So we'll begin with our guest today is Congressman Ron Paul. He was a candidate for president. He's been my hero for years and years and years. I have followed him, his books, and the Fed and all this. And again, my definition of intelligence, if I agree with him, he's intelligent. So I agree with Ron Paul. But he's also on the program because he's a constitutionalist. And my suspicion is the Marxists are after our Constitution. So before we begin, Kim, what do you want to say about our freedom of speech?
I'm all about pro-Constitution, and free speech has been a very big concern of ours. We've experienced it ourselves at the Rich Dad Company, being taken down off of YouTube and Instagram and Facebook and all of that. But it's gotten so crazy that we have a board game called Cash Flow. We had it on Google. We had a little ad that we've been running it forever. Same little blurb about the game, and it teaches investing. And all of a sudden, one day the game disappeared and it was taken down. And we call and we're like, what's happening? Why did they take our game down? And when we dug into it, is because there was a sentence in it that said some investors, when it comes to money, are very risk takers. They're risk takers, while others are conservative. And because we use the word conservative, they took us down.
That's subversive as heck.
Yeah. So, Dr. Ron Paul, I would love your comment on free speech and the Constitution, and what is it? It seems to be greatly under attack.
Is it possible, Dr. Paul? Is it they're after is it possible that's what they're ultimately after? Stack the Supreme Court and change the Constitution. Is that possible?
Well, yes, it's possible, and that depends on how awakened the people get, and people get educated by the type of work that you do, and which way the people go, because we're going to have a calamity, and we can either roll over and accept, a fascist state, and yes, it would be impossible, or we have a renewal, and I still go and talk to a large number of young people, and I come away with a positive attitude because they're interested in it. And I also recognize that total numbers aren't the final figure. I think you have to have the 8 or 10% of the people leading with the proper ideas, and then they have to convince up to 51% to endorse it. I think the governments are always a reflection of the prevailing attitude of the people. Right now, the prevailing attitude has slipped away, and there's a conflict because what we have isn't working very well. But this idea of getting a few more people in that are constitutionalists, we should try that, but it's a bigger problem than that, because right now, under the circumstance of the people who are in our leadership position, they don't care about the Constitution. It's what they say it is. It's relative. They're flexible. They have to adapt it to modern times, and they believe that is proper. And they say, well, they're constitutionalists, so they're lying to themselves and to everybody else. And I see it more, not just getting more people that say I'm a constitutionalist, because sometimes I support a new person coming in, they'd be a constitutionalist, but they didn't have the vaguest idea, what it meant. I think that more importantly is that what type of morality people have, because even if you didn't have a constitution, if you had a moral people that accepted some basic notions, like you're not supposed to lie, cheat, steal, or kill, and that's pretty basic. It's been around for thousands of years in most religions. But so John Adams said that this Constitution isn't going to be worth anything if the people don't maintain their morality. So I see that as the biggest problem, that plus the education. And so there would have to be a moral revival, as well as rooting out, of the educational system. We should stop subsidizing all universities, for instance. And of course, we have to certainly maintain homeschooling and private schooling. And right now, there's a resistance put up against the public schools. The homeschooling system has doubled and tripled. I have a homeschooling program, very modest. Our numbers went up tremendously because the other side is failing. And that pragmatic effect on what's working, I think, is very important. But, I don't think you can overemphasize the morality of it. Now, I remember when it came to the war issue, when they were trying to get the authority to go into, start a major war with Afghanistan. I was on the committee, and everybody was they were going to give the authority to the president to do whatever he wanted, which was even more aggravating because they wouldn't say, well, what we want to do is invade them and occupy them and create a war. So I made them vote on an amendment that said on the bill, it said that they had to declare war. And boy, did I get the grief from that. The chairman of the committee said, Dr. Paul, we know you're a constitutionalist, all this, but the Constitution in this area is anachronistic. We don't follow that part anymore. And he was serious. That's the way he did it. And one other member of Congress during the committee hearing said, that I was arguing that we didn't, they didn't commit aggression against us. Why are we going into war? And because Iraq was involved in this deal too. And they said, and the individual said, no, we have to go to war because they're all over the place and we have to invade and take care of them. And his argument, he's, Dr. Paul, you're wrong. They have been aggressive. They've been shooting at our bombers for the past 10 years. And I thought, that's where you are on the argument. So just changing it, changing more people is important. You should do it. And I'm sure, Robert, their intentions are to take over the Supreme Court, but, it depends on, how it's interpreted. I was, a little bit disappointed when 80% of people in San Francisco said that, they're policing up activity over there, and the crap and stress and all the mess they have in the city is okay, and they endorsed, the governor said there's no problem with this. But that still doesn't destroy my optimism, because I don't think San Francisco and a few other cities, I think it's a message. Who runs those cities? Who should be blamed? What is the philosophy? And instead, why is it that maybe Texas and Florida and a few other places, South Dakota, why are they succeeding? That's the message that has to be, put out there. And I actually think it's possible that we can get that. If I didn't, I'd probably say, what am I doing this for? No, I happen to believe that things can be changed, and I've been encouraged, but nobody knows exactly what will happen, because sometimes it takes a long time for people to wake up. Look how long it took the Russian people to wake up. And I was in the military as well during the 60s. I was in from 63 to 68. And that was at the top of the Cold War, and there was, and the Cuban crisis was going on. And yet, what happened in '89? Boom, the Cold War was over, and I hoped for more. But I was delighted that they just walked away. We didn't have a nuclear exchange. So there's still, the failure of their system and the energy of those of us. And Robert, you're part of it. You have the energy and you have the experience. You've been in the military. You know how ridiculous these wars are. So I think that's what we need. And now we have the struggle of staying on the internet. Well, the internet's bigger than those criminals. I'll tell you what, the internet is going to offer us a way to get our information out. So I think that is the key to trying to preserve our liberties.
So I agree. I have a quick question, though. Because you're a constitutionalist, would you simply say that, like, the 10 Commandments are also a constitution? You talked about morality and all that, but why is the Constitution so important to America? Because that is probably your spine, that is your core, Dr. Paul.
Well,
why is the Constitution so important?
I think it's because the Constitution was written in such a way that it maximized personal liberty. But even the anti-federalists, they argue that this is not going to work, and they didn't think that they should have a constitutional convention. So the debate has started right on, and even on monetary policy, the debate was roaring between Jefferson and Hamilton. So it was there all the time. But I think the founders were mostly deists, and they were believers, but I don't get into any of the religious arguments when I do my speeches as much as the general morality, of the people being universal, and the non-aggression principle, which is supported by Christians and Jews and a lot of other religions as well.
So what do you think of the vaccine passport idea? I just can't believe they're going to force me to get a shot. I'm going, wait a minute, I've already had COVID. Why do I want another shot,
And to that point too, I think the Supreme Court did rule that mandating vaccines was unconstitutional. I thought they did, but the administration doesn't seem to care.
Well, the Constitution is important because it's supposed to protect our liberties, and they're ignored. So that's the only thing we can fall back short of using violence. So I think it is important. I think it is and has been a good document, not perfect though. But the real problem is that the people who are supposed to enforce it are imperfect, and they have to yield to the temptation to use the benefits, the special benefits, whether it's power or money, coming, from the government and subsidized, of course, with counterfeit money at the Federal Reserve, and also the artificialness of the foreign policy that we are the king of the world and we have an empire. And a lot of Americans think that's a patriotic thing to do. And, I was on the receiving end that I was unpatriotic and against the military for my position on it. But it's something that I hung my hat on the Constitution because it was the best I could do right now. But I never took the position that it was a document that was absolutely right, because I would have done things a little bit differently. I would have probably wanted something more like the Articles of Confederation, and not in having too many loopholes for getting what we ended up getting, because what we have now is a giant federal government and also international government that we adhere to. So I think the great movement going on right now, the people who are falling back from the federal government, even the left, sometimes will ignore federal government laws, and even though the laws are probably more decent that they're objecting to, I think they're rejecting the federal government. I think that is fine. I like that little secession movement going on in Atlanta. That's what we need. We need hundreds of people seceding from big cities. If there's a big city and they've been, for years, they have marched out and they were under the law, be able to incorporate outer areas that have avoided some of the stupid policy of the inner cities. And now, hopefully, it will reverse, that people will demand, I don't want to be part of San Francisco or LA, and we are going to have our own government. That is not easily done, but I think on principle, it should be described.
So let me go back on what you said earlier. To me, the Constitution is a set of laws, and we haven't had a Constitution. This is an undeclared war we've been in for a long time right now. But also, when you're going back to morality, can you make the case, not really religious, can you make the case that 10 Commandments, this comes out of the Old Testament, is a constitution for morality? Can you make that?
Yeah, I would think so. That doesn't mean that I wouldn't want an interpretation of something said in the 10 Commandments. But basically, yes. Because it's, in a way, it's very libertarian. It doesn't endorse. So I start with a principle that is endorsed by a lot of people, but no, I think it's very libertarian, and the Constitution is very libertarian. But to prove that point, you have to get people that endorse that. It's the way they act that counts, and how they respond to whether it's the Constitution or their own morality.
So that's what you're saying, is that without morality, the Constitution is not worth anything anyway.
That's it. That's it. You said it well.
Yes. Well, with the whole vaccine mandates and the vaccine passports, it just seems that they're just little by little taking away more and more, trying to take away more and more and more freedoms. What do we need to do?
Well, what you have to do is, get people to resist. And I think every day we do a program, we talk about resist. The other day, I really got excited when I'm not a very good spectator, but I hated it when I watched stadiums with people, social distancing and nobody in the stadium, and the owners rolling over for the government. but there were some college games on Saturday, I guess. And the stadiums were jam-packed with young people having fun and enjoying themselves. And they didn't have masks on, and they didn't have any social distancing on, and they were probably challenging. I just thought, boy, those authoritarians who are preaching this, this medical philosophy that is preposterous. I mean, the medical stuff.
No, you're not.
And you're a medical doctor.
Yeah, you know.
Well, it's rather sad that's going on. But I've read one article today that said all doctors have to be rejected. I don't agree with that, but because there's some good doctors coming out that makes sense on television. But it's the people who are in government as working on our medical condition. And also all the pundits, all the doctors that go on major television. I saw somebody saying none of them ever treated a patient. Do you think Fauci knows what it's like to treat a patient? And that's why I have a lot of respect for nurses who have been in those wars from day one. And now, and they don't want the vaccine because they think a vaccine is a dangerous thing. But they're the nurses. They've worked for 18 months, and yet now they're criminals because they won't take the vaccine. And some of them are getting fired. The hospitals are closing down because the nurses are leaving. But I have a lot of respect for a good nurse, I'll tell you that.
Well, Dr. Paul, that's called fascism. I think we're already there.
So
anyway, I really want to thank you for your fight for liberty. Like I said, I read your book years and years and years ago, and I said, this guy's intelligent because he agrees with me. But anyway, thank you very much for your service and all for the country and having the courage to speak out. Final word, Kim?
No, I just thank you for the work you do and keep waking people up, and we will support that all day long. And whatever we can do to further those efforts, you just let us know. We're there with you.
Keep up the good work, and Robert, it's been great to be with you again.
Thank you, man. Keep up with the work. Same thing to you. Thank you. Bye-bye. We'll come back with a final word with Sarah and all this, and we'll complete this program. So thank you, Dr. Paul. Welcome back, Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show. I want to thank Dr. Ron Paul, but he's also a presidential candidate. He was the most popular president we ever had. I mean, everybody, all the young people loved that guy. And it's just not because what he says, but he's wanted to tell them the truth. And like he talked about the football games, the NFL now, we have 2 national anthems. And then college games, people are screaming and yelling, having a good time. And I think that's what we're talking about is that freedom. So once again, listen to Rich Dad Radio anytime. We archive this at richdadradio.com for one reason. Please share this with your friends, family, and associates, because this COVID thing and whatever's going on is dividing our country. Why in the world do we have 2 national anthems? What is wrong with us? So final word there, Kim.
Well, I just so appreciate Dr. Paul because he's been on this fight for ever since I've ever heard of him, which would have been in the 80s or 90s. And he said it early on. He said, I talk to all these students and they think I'm optimistic. And he says, I'm not really optimistic so much as I tell the truth. And that's what people want to hear. And I like that he stays above the weeds in many cases. And I loved his story about the college football games because I just read recently, I think it was in New York, and if you're not vaccinated, you can't come in our restaurant. And so they had all these people outside the restaurant on a beautiful day, picnicking and partying, and they weren't social distancing. They didn't have masks. They were having a great time. So we can still have a bit of a sense of humor about all of this because it is, if it wasn't so dire, we would all be laughing.
And so the Constitution is we're a nation of laws. It's just like he talks about, but without it's very similar to the 10 Commandments, not that they were religious, but without those laws, the Constitution has no power. Final words there, sir?
I just want to let our audience know if they want to learn more from Dr. Ron Paul or get more of his perspective, you can visit ronpaullibertyreport.com. He issues like a daily blog and a daily video. But what I took from this is it did give me hope. And I know we don't love that word around here, but it's almost like if we can get more people to keep speaking out like he does for liberty and freedom and the Constitution, then that gives me hope. So I like the work we're doing, and having guests like him on just to spread the word. gives me hope.
Yeah. Hope is different than being hopeless.
Yeah, that's a good
Do
point.
you know what I mean? There's a lot of pathetic, hopeless people out there right now. So we're actually proactive.
Yeah.
And that's what we're asking people, to be proactive. If you want to be a Marxist, it's a free country. So I want to thank you all. I want to thank Dr. Ron Paul. Remember, the Constitution without the 10 Commandments is not worth anything. Thank you for listening to the Rich Dad Radio Show.
Thank you.